It is a beautiful day here in the city of Shadenhall, a beautiful day where we shall be running inside and reading a series of books, not just one book, but many books. We will be doing 0 exploration in this video since we have explored all there is to explore outside of the Shivering Isles, but that we're going to hold off until we complete the main storyline. But today, we're going to read the series of Feyfolken, which is a very long series. It's a lot of reading, 18 pages, 21 pages, and 22 pages. So yeah, it's gonna take a little while, but hey, we gotta 1,000,000,000% the game. We'll see. But yeah, let's go read the story of Feyfolken. Hopefully it'll be good enough to hold our entertainment for like essentially 60 pages. What is that? That's 61 pages actually. Yeah, right? Yeah, 61 pages. Feyfolken, Book 1 by God, we're already off to a bad start. Wayan Jarth. Sure. The great sage was a tall, untidy man, bearded but bald. His library resembled him. All the books had been moved over the years to the bottom shelves where they gathered in dusty conglomerations. I did actually know that word. It took me a second. I saw how many letters there were, and my brain just I got very scared for a second, but I figured it out. He used several of the books in his current lecture, explaining to his students Taxim and Vongeldag how the Mages Guild had first been founded by Venus Galerian. They had many questions about Galerian's beginnings in the Psijic Order, and how the study of magic there differed from the Mages Guild. It was, and is, a very structured way of life, explained the great sage. Quite elitist, actually. That was the aspect of it Galerian most objected to. He wanted the study of magic to be free. Well, not free exactly, but at least available to all who could afford it. So, not free at all, apparently. In doing that, he changed the course of life in Tamriel. He codified the praxes and rituals used by all modern potion makers, item makers, and spell makers, didn't he, great sage? Asked Vongeldak, yeah. That was only part of it. Magic as we know it today comes from Venus Galerian. He restructured the schools to be understandable by the masses. He invented the tools of alchemy and enchanting so everyone could concoct whatever they wanted, whatever their skills and purpose would allow them to, without fears of magical backfire. Well, eventually he created that. What do you mean, great sage? Asked Taxim. The first tools were more automated than the ones we have today. Any layman could use them without the least understanding of enchantment and alchemy. Why don't we still use them? On the Isle of Artaeum, the students had to learn the skills laboriously and over many years, but Galerian decided that was another example of the Psijic elitism. The tools he invented were like robotic masters, enchanters, and alchemists, capable of creating anything the customer required, provided he could pay. Of course, once again, back to the capitalism. God, I love it. So someone could, for example, create a sword that would cleave the world in twain? In twain, huh? Asked Vongeldak. I suppose, in theory, but it would probably take all the gold in the world, chuckled the great sage. Haha. No, I can't say we were ever in very great danger. Man, I mean, my character would have had a great-ass time, because I'm literally a millionaire right now, which is pretty rare, I believe, in this game. No, I can't say we were ever in very great danger, but that isn't to say that there weren't a few unfortunate incidents where an unschooled yokel invented something beyond his ken. Eventually, of course, Galerian tore apart his old tools and created what we use today. It's a little elitist, requiring that people know what they're doing before they do it, but remarkably practical. Yeah, what a concept, huh? What did people invent? Asked Taxim. Are there any stories? You're trying to distract me so I don't test you, said the great sage. But I suppose I can tell you one story, just to illustrate a point. This particular tale takes place in the city of Alinor on the west coast of Somerset Isle, and it concerns a scribe named Tharbad. This was in the Second Era, not long after Venus Galarian had first founded the Mages Guild, and chapter houses had sprung up all over Somerset, though not yet spread to the mainland of Tamriel. For 5 years, this scribe Thorbad had conducted all his correspondence to the outside world by way of his messenger boy, Gorgos. For the first year of his adoption of the hermit life, his few remaining friends and family of his dead wife, truth be told, had tried visiting. But even the most indefatigable, I think, something like that, kitten gives up eventually when given no encouragement. But one had a good reason to keep in touch with Thorbad Holzik, and in time, very few even tried. His sister-in-law sent him the occasional letter with news of people he could barely remember, but even that communication was rare. Most of the messages to and from his house dealt with his business, writing the weekly proclamation from the Temple of Ariel. These were bulletins nailed on the temple door, community news, sermons, that sort of thing. The first message Gorgos brought him that day was from his healer, reminding him of his appointment on Tertis. Thorbad took a while to write his response, glum and affirmative. He had the Crimson Plague, which he was being treated for at considerable expense. You have to remember, these were the days before the School of Restoration had become quite so specialized. It was a dreadful disease and had taken away his voice box. That was why he only communicated by script. The next message was from Alfiers, the secretary at the church, as curt and noxious as ever. Thorbad attached his Surdes's sermon, next week's events calendar, and the obituaries. Tried to liven them up a little. I wasn't happy with your last attempt. Thorbad had taken the job putting together the bulletin before Alfiers joined the temple, so his only mental image of her was purely theoretical and had evolved over time. At first, he thought of Alfiers as an ugly, fat Slotus? Covered with warts. More recently, she had mutated into a rail-thin spinster Orkess? Yeah, Orkess. Of course, it was possible his clairvoyance was accurate and she had just lost weight. Whatever Alfiers looked like, her attitude towards Thorbad was clear. Unwavering disdain. She hated his sense of humor, always found the most minor of misspellings, and considered his structure and calligraphy the worst kind of amateur work. Luckily, working for a temple was the next most secure job to working for the good king of Alinor. It didn't bring in very much money, but his expenses were minimal. The truth was, he didn't need to do it anymore. He had quite a fortune stashed away, but he didn't have anything else to occupy his days. And the truth was further, that having little else to occupy his time and thoughts, the bulletin was very important to him. Gorgos, having delivered all the messages, began to clean, and as he did so, he told Thorbad all the news in town. The boy always did so, and Thorbad seldom paid him any attention, but this time he had an interesting report. The Mages Guild had come to Alinor. As Thorbad listened intently, Gorgos told him all about the guild, the remarkable archmagister, and the incredible tools of alchemy and enchanting. Finally, when the lad had finished, Thorbad scribbled a quick note and handed it in a quill to Gorgos. The note read, "Have them enchant this quill." "It will be expensive," said Gorgos. Thorbad gave Gorgos a sizable chunk of the thousands of gold pieces he had saved over the years. Yeah, I mean, imagine what 1,000,000 golds can do, huh? And sent him out the door. Now, Thorbad decided, he would finally have the ability to impress Alfiers and bring glory to the Temple of Ariel. The way I've heard the story, Gorgos had thought about taking the gold and leaving Alinor, but he had come to care for poor old Thorbad, and even more, he hated Alfiers, who had to see every day to get his messages for his master. It wasn't perhaps for the best of motivations, but Gorgos decided to go to the guild and get the quill enchanted. The Mages Guild was not then, especially not then, an elitist institution, as I have said, but when the messenger boy came in and asked to use the item maker, he was greeted with some suspicion. When he showed the bag of gold, the attitude melted and he was ushered in the room. Classic. Now, I haven't seen one of the enchanting tools of old, so you must use your imagination. There was a large prism for the item to be bound with magicka, assuredly, and an assortment of soul gems and globes of trapped energies. Other than that, I cannot be certain how it looked or how it worked. Because of all the gold he gave to the guild, Gorgos could infuse the quill with the highest price soul available, which was something Daedric called Feyfolken. The initiate at the guild, being ignorant as most guild members were at that time, did not know very much about the spirit except that it was filled with energy. When Gorgos left the room, the quill had been enchanted to its very limit and then some. It was virtually quivering with power. Of course, when Thorbad used it, that's when it became clear how over his head he was. "And now," said the great sage, "it's time for your test." "But what happened? What were the quill's powers?" cried Taxim. "You can't stop the tale there," objected Von Guldak. "We will continue the tale after your conjuration test, provided you both perform exceptionally well," said the great sage. Well, thankfully I don't believe, will be having to take that test, so we're just going to jump over to the next book. Feyfolken, Book 2, by Wayne Jarth. I don't know. I'm going to pronounce it differently every time, just because. I don't think it really matters, huh? After the test had been given and Von Guldak and Taxim had demonstrated their knowledge of elementary conjuration, the great sage told them that they were free to enjoy the day. The two lads, who most afternoons fidgeted through their lessons, refused to leave their seats. "You told us that after the test, you'd tell us more of your tale about the scribe and his enchanted quill," said Taxim. "You've already told us about the scribe, how he lived alone in his battles with the temple secretary over the bulletin he scripted for posting, and how he suffered from the crimson blade and couldn't speak. When you left off, his messenger boy had just had his master's quill enchanted with the spirit of a Daedra named Feyfolken," added Von Guldak to add the great sage's memory. "As it happens," said the great sage, "I was thinking about a nap. However, the story does touch on some issues of the natures of spirits and thus is related to conjuration, so I'll continue. Thorbad began using the quill to write the temple bulletin, and there was something about the slightly lopsided, almost three-dimensional quality of the letters that Thorbad liked a lot. Three-dimensional? Cool. Into the night, Thorbad put together the Temple of Ariel's bulletin. For the moment he washed over the page with the Feyfolken quill, it became a work of art, an illuminated manuscript crafted of gold, but with good, simple, and strong vernacular. The sermon excerpts read like poetry, despite being based on the archpriest's workmanlike exhortation of the most banal of the Alessian doctrines. The obituaries of two of the temple's chief benefactors were stark and powerful. Pitifully mundane deaths transitioned into world-class tragedies. Thorbad worked the magical palette until he nearly fainted from exhaustion. At 6 o'clock in the morning, a day before deadline, he handed the bulletin to Gorgos for him to carry to Alfairs, the temple secretary. As expected, Alfairs never wrote back to compliment him or even comment on how early he had sent the bulletin. It didn't matter. Thorbad knew it was the best bulletin the temple had ever posted. At 1 o'clock on Sundas, Gorgos brought him many messages. "The bulletin today was so beautiful. When I read it in the vestibule, I am ashamed to tell you I wept copiously." Copiously. That word just always reminds me of Game of Thrones when they ask for the copious details. Wrote the archpriest, "I don't think I've seen anything that captures Ariel's glory so beautifully before. The cathedrals of Firsthold pale in comparison. My friend, I prostrate myself before the greatest artist since Galael." The archpriest was, like most men of the cloth, given to hyperbole. Still, Thorbad was happy with the compliment. More messages followed. All of the temple elders and 33 of the parishioners, young and old, had all taken the time to find out who wrote the bulletin and how to get a message to congratulate him. That is highly impressive for 100% of people to respond back. Oh my god. And there was only one person they could go through for that information. Alfairs. Imaging the dragon lady besieged by his admirers filled Thorbad with positive glee. He was still in a good mood the next day when he took the ferry to his appointment with his healer, Telemichel. Sure. The herbalist was new, a pretty Redguard woman who tried to talk to him, even after he gave her the note reading, "My name is Thorbad Hulzik, and I have an appointment with Telemichel for 11 o'clock. Please forgive me for not talking, but I have no voice box anymore." Has it started raining yet? She asked cheerfully. The diviner said it might. Thorbad frowned and shook his head angrily. Why was it that everyone thought that mute people liked to be talked to? Did soldiers who lost their arms like to be thrown balls? What? It was undoubtedly not a... What does that even mean? What? Okay, like playing catch? That's a weird way. Saying just having balls be thrown just sounds very strange, and I don't know. Okay. Especially since like this game, like catch. The concept of catch in Oblivion in the Elder Scrolls does not exist. So, did soldiers who lost their arms like to be thrown balls? Just sounds a little weird on its own. It was undoubtedly not a purposefully cruel behavior, but Thorbad was still suspected that some people just liked to prove that they weren't crippled too. The examination itself was routine horror. Telemichael performed the regular invasive torture, all the while chatting and chatting and chatting. You ought to try talking once in a while. That's the only way to see if you're getting better. If you don't feel comfortable doing it in public, you could try practicing it by yourself, said Telemichael. Knowing his patient would ignore his advice. Try singing in the bath. You'll probably find you don't sound as bad as you think. Thorbad left the examination with the promise of test results in a couple of weeks. On the ferry ride back home, Thorbad began thinking of next week's temple bulletin. What about a double border around the last Sundas's offering plate announcement? Putting the sermon in 2 columns instead of 1 might have interesting effects. It was almost unbearable to think that he couldn't get started on it until Alfeir sent him information. When she did, it was with the note, "Last bulletin a little better. Next time, don't use the word fortuitous in place of fortunate. The words are not, if you look them up, synonymous." What a dick. In response, Thorbad almost followed Telemichael's advice by screaming obscenities at Gorgus. Instead, he drank a bottle of cheap wine, composed and sent a suitable reply, and fell asleep on the floor. The next morning, after a long bath, Thorbad began work on the bulletin. His idea for putting a light shading effect on the special announcements section had an amazing textual effect. Alfeir's always hated the extra decorations he added to the borders, but using the Feyfolken quill, they looked strangely powerful and majestic. Gorgos came to him with a message from Alfeir's at the very moment, as if in response to the thought. Thorbad opened it up. It simply said, "I'm sorry." Thorbad kept working. Alfeir's note he put from his mind, sure that she would soon follow it up with the complete message. "I'm sorry that no one ever taught you to keep right hand and left hand margins the same length," or "I'm sorry we can't get someone other than a weird old man as scribe of our bulletin." It didn't matter what she was sorry about. The columns from the sermon notes rose like the massive pillars of roses, crowned with unashamedly ornate headers. The obituaries and birth announcements were framed together with a spherical border as a heartbreaking declaration of the circle of life. The bulletin was simultaneously both warm and avant-garde. It was a masterpiece. When he sent it off to Alfeir's late that afternoon, he knew she'd hate it, and was glad. Thorbad was surprised to get a message from the Temple of Lordas. Before he read the content, he could tell from the style that it wasn't from Alfeir's. The handwriting wasn't Alfeir's usual belligerent, slashing style, and it wasn't all in Alfeir's usual capital letters, which read like a scream from Oblivion. "Thorbad, I thought you should know Alfeir's isn't at the temple anymore. She quit her position yesterday, very suddenly. My name is Vanderthil, and I was lucky enough, let me admit it now, I begged pitifully, to be your new temple contact. I'm overwhelmed by your genius. I was having a crisis of faith until I read last week's bulletin. This week's bulletin is a miracle. enough. I just wanted to say I'm honored to be working with you, Vanderthil." The response on Sundas after the service even astonished Thorbad. The archpriest attributed the massive increase in attendance and collection plate offerings entirely to the bulletin. Thorbad's salary was quadrupled. Gorgos brought over 120 messages from his adoring public. The following week, Thorbad sat in front of his writing plank, a glass of fine Torvali mead at his side, staring at the blank scroll. He had no ideas. The bulletin, his child, his second wife bored him. The third-rate sermons of the archbishop were absolute anathema, and the deaths and births of the temple patrons struck him as entirely pointless. Blah, blah, he thought as he scribed on the page. He knew he wrote the letters B-L-A-H, B-L-A-H. The words that appeared on the scroll were a necklace of pearl on a white neck. He scrawled a jagged line across the page. It appeared in through that damned beautiful Feyfolken quill. Glory to Ariel. Thorbad slammed the quill and poetry spilled forth in a stream of ink. He scratched over the page, blotted over everything, and the vanquished words sprung back up in different form, even more exquisite than before. Every daub and splatter caused the document to whirl like a kaleidoscope before falling together in gorgeous symmetry. There was nothing he could do to ruin the bulletin. Feyfolken had taken over. He was a reader, not an author. "Now," asked the great sage, "what was Feyfolken from your knowledge of the school of conjuration?" "What happened next?" cried von Guldak. "First, tell me what Feyfolken was, and then I'll continue the story." "You said it was a daedra," said Taxum, "and it seems to have something to do with artistic expression. Was Feyfolken a servitor of Azura?" "But the scribe may have been imagining all this," said von Guldak. "Perhaps Feyfolken is a servitor of Sheogorath, and he's gone mad, or the quill's writing makes everyone who views it, like all the congregation at the Temple of Ariel, go mad. Hermaeus Amora is the daedra of knowledge, and her scene is the daedra of the wild, and the daedra of revenge is Boethia," pondered Taxum. And then he smiled. "Feyfolken is a servitor of Clavicus Vile, isn't he?" "Very good," said the great sage. "How did you know?" "It's his style," said Taxum, "assuming that he doesn't want the power of the quill now that he has it." "What happens next? I'll tell you," said the great sage, and continued the tale. I will say this, it's a very interesting story. I feel like, I don't really know the point of this story. I feel like it doesn't really add too much to the game, but it's interesting. It's interesting, I will say that. I suppose now we know it kind of provides some background on what kind of Daedric prince Clavicus Vile is. Yeah, it's interesting though. Alright. Feyfolken, Book 3, by one Jaff. Thorbad had at least seen the power of the quill, said the great sage, continuing his tale, enchanted with the Daedra Feyfolken, servitor of Clavicus Vile, and had brought him great wealth and fame as the scribe of the weekly bulletin of the Temple of Ariel, but he realized that it was the artist, and he merely the witness to its magic. He was furious and jealous. With a cry, he snapped the quill in half. He turned to finish his glass of mead. When he turned around, the quill was intact. He had no other quills but the one he had enchanted, so he dipped his finger in the inkwell and wrote a note to Gorgos in big, sloppy letters. When Gorgos returned with a new batch of congratulatory messages from the temple, praising his latest bulletin, he handed the note in the quill to his messenger boy. The note read, "Take the quill back to the Mages Guild and sell it. Buy me another quill with no enchantments." Gorgos didn't know what to make of the note, but he did as he was told. He returned a few hours later. "They wouldn't give us any gold back for it," said Gorgos. "They said it wasn't enchanted. I told him. I said, 'What are you talking about? You enchanted it right here with that Feyfolken soul gem.' And they said, 'Well, there ain't a soul in it now. Maybe you did something and it got loose.'" Gorgos paused to look at his master. Thorbad couldn't speak, of course, but he seemed even more usually speechless. "Anyway, I threw the quill away and got you this new one, like you said." Thorbad studied the new quill. It was white-feathered, while his old quill had been dove gray. It felt good in his hand. He sighed with relief and waved his messenger lad away. He had a bulletin to write, and this time without any magic except for his own talent. Within 2 days' time, he was nearly back on schedule. It looked plain, but it was entirely his. Thorbad felt a strange reassurance when he ran his eyes over the page and noticed some slight errors. It had been a long time since the bulletin contained any errors. In fact, Thorbad reflected happily. There were probably other mistakes still in the document that he was not seeing. He was finishing a final whirl of plain calligraphy on the borders when Gorgos arrived with some messages from the temple. He looked through them all quickly until one caught his eye. The wax seal on the letter read, Feyfolken. With complete bafflement, he broke it open. "I think you should kill yourself," it read in perfectly gorgeous script. What the fuck? Oh, goddamn, okay. That was unexpected. He dropped the letter to the floor, seeing sudden movement on the bulletin. Feyfolken's script leapt from the letter and coursed over the scroll in a flood, translating his shabby document into a work of sublime beauty. Thorbad no longer cared about the weird croaking quality of his voice. He screamed for a very long time, and then drank heavily. Gorgos brought Thorbad a message from Vanderthil, the secretary of the temple, early Frida's morning, but it took the scribe until mid-morning to work up the courage to look at it. "Good morning. I am just checking in on the bulletin. You usually have it in Tertus night. I'm curious. You planning something special?" Vanderthil. Thorbad responded, "Vanderthil, I'm sorry. I've been sick. There won't be a bulletin this Sunday." "This Sunday? Whoa. Sunday is not a real thing. In this game, Sunday does not exist," and handed the note to Gorgos before retiring to his bath. When he came back an hour later, Gorgos was just returning from the temple, smiling. "Vanderthil and the archpriest went crazy," he said. "They said it was your best work ever." Thorbad looked at Gorgos, uncomprehending. Then he noticed that the bulletin was gone. Shaking, he dipped his finger in the ink well and scrawled the words, "What did the note I sent with you say?" "You don't remember?" asked Gorgos, holding back a smile. He knew the master had been drinking a lot lately. "I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, 'Vanderthil, here it is. Sorry it's late. I've been having severe mental problems lately.'" Thorbad, "Since you said, 'Here it is,' I figured you wanted me to bring the bulletin along, so I did. And like I said, they loved it. I bet you get 3 times as much letters this Sundas." Back to Sundas now, huh? Thorbad nodded his head, smiled, and waved the messenger lad away. Gorgos returned back to the temple, while his master turned to his writing plank and pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment. He wrote with the quill, "What do you want, Feyfolken?" The words became, "Goodbye, I hate my life, I have cut my wrists." Thorbad tried another tact. "Have I gone insane?" The words became, "Goodbye, I have poison, I hate my life. Why are you doing this to me? I, Thorbad Holzik, cannot live with myself and my ingratitude. That's why I put this noose around my neck." Thorbad picked up a fresh parchment, dipped his finger in the inkwell, and proceeded to rewrite the entire bulletin. While his original draft, before Feyfolken had altered it, had been simple and flawed, the new copy was a scrawl. Lowercase i's were undotted. G's looked like Y's, sentences ran into margins and curled up and all over like serpents. Ink from the first page leaked onto the second page. When he yanked the pages from the notebook, a long tear nearly divided the third page in half. Something about the final result was evocative. Thorbad at least hoped so. He wrote another note reading simply, "Use this bulletin instead of the piece of trash I sent you." When Gorgos returned with new messages, Thorbad handed the envelope to him. The new letters were all the same, except for the one from his healer, Tilamakail. "Thorbad, we need you to come in as soon as possible. We've received the reports from Blackmarsh about a strain of the Crimson Plague that sounds very much like your disease, and we need to re-examine you. Nothing is definite yet, but we're going to want to see what our options are." It took Thorbad the results of the day and 15 drams of the stoutest mead to recover. The larger part of the next morning was spent recovering from this means of recovery. He started to write a message to Vanderthil. "What did you think of the new bulletin?" With the quill, Feyfolken's improved version was, "I'm going to ignite myself on fire because I'm a dying no talent." Thorbad rewrote the notes using his finger and ink message. When Gorgos appeared, he handed him the note. There was one message in Vanderthil's handwriting. It read, "Thorbad, not only are you divinely inspired, but you have a great sense of humor. Imagine us using those scribbles you sent instead of the real bulletin. You made the Archbishop laugh heartily. I cannot wait to see what you have next week. Yours fondly, Vanderthil." The funeral service a week later, oh geez, wow, big time jump there. The funeral service a week later brought out far more friends and admirers than Thorbad Holzik would have believed possible. The coffin, of course, had to be closed, but that didn't stop the mourners from filing into lines to touch its smooth oak surface, imagining it as the flesh of the artist himself. The Archbishop managed to rise to the occasion and deliver a better than usual eulogy. Thorbad's old nemesis, the secretary before Vanderthil, Alphaears, came in from cloud rest, wailing and telling all who would listen that Thorbad's suggestions had changed the direction of her life. When she heard Thorbad had left her his quill and his final testament, she broke down in tears. Vanderthil was even more inconsolable, until she found a handsome and delightfully single young man. What? I can hardly believe he's gone, and I never even saw him face to face or spoke to him, she said. I saw the body, but even if he hadn't been all burned up, I wouldn't have been able to tell if it was him or not. I wish I could tell you there'd been a mistake, but there was plenty of medical evidence, said Telemachael. I supplied some of it myself. He was a patient of mine, you see. Oh, said Vanderthil. Was he sick or something? He had the Crimson Plague years ago. That's what took away his voice box, but it appeared to have gone into complete remission. Actually, I had just sent him a note telling him words to that effect the day before he killed himself. Actually, I had just sent him a note telling him words to that effect. Oh, right. Yeah, no, we knew that. You're that healer, exclaimed Vanderthil. Thorbad's messenger boy, Gorgos, told me that he had just picked up that message when I sent mine, complimenting him on the new, primitive design for the bulletin. It was amazing work. I never would have told him this, but I had begun to suspect he was stuck in an outmoded style. It turned out he had one last work of genius before going out in a blaze of glory, figuratively and literally. Why you gotta joke like that at a man's funeral? God damn. Vanderthil showed the healer Thorbad's last bulletin, and Telemachael agreed that its frantic, nearly illegible style spoke volumes about the power and majesty of the god Ariel. Now I'm thoroughly confused, said Von Goldak. About which part? Asked the great sage. I think the tale is very straightforward. Feyfolken made all the bulletins beautiful, except for the last one. The one Thorbad? It's supposed to be Thorbad, right? Yeah, Thorbad did it for himself, said Taksim thoughtfully. But why did he misread the notes from Vanderthil and the healer? Did Feyfolken change those words? Perhaps, smiled the great sage. Or did Feyfolken change Thorbad's perceptions of those words? Asked Von Goldak. Did Feyfolken make him mad after all? Very likely, said the great sage. But that would mean that Feyfolken was a servitor of Sheogorath, said Von Goldak. And you said he was a servitor of Clavicus Vile. Which was he? An agent of mischief or an agent of insanity? The will was surely altered by Feyfolken, said Taksim, and that's the sort of thing a servitor of Clavicus Vile would do to perpetuate the curse. As an appropriate ending to the tale of the scribe and his cursed will, smiled the great sage, I will let you read into it as you will. So my gentle viewers, who was it? Was it Clavicus Vile or Sheogorath? Me personally, I'm going to say Sheogorath, because Sheogorath is a lot cooler. And we're also going to go to the Shivering Isles at some point decently soon. So that's my vote. But yeah, those were some stories. Interesting stories. I don't think they really provide too much value to the game, but they were interesting, and they took a pretty goddamn long time to read. So in the next video, we are going to continue the main storyline with the Blood of the Divines. But until then, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope to see you in that video. Goodbye.
Cause I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you. Cause I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you.